Georgia wide receiver Rara Thomas is facing multiple felonies, has been suspended by his team after he was arrested early Friday morning in Athens. 3 counts of second-degree cruelty to children and 3 counts of family violence battery. He was booked at 3:20 a.m. So we're joined by T. Scott Jones of Banks and Jones, who's nice enough to provide us a little bit of insight. And T. Scott, thank you, sir. We appreciate it. How are you?
Oh, splendid. I'll tell you what, good Monday morning, trying to dry out here. We've had our share of rain, but I guess into every life, a little bit of rain's got to fall. Evidently, It fell pretty hard in Mr. Thomas's life.
It did. If you want to come swim in my front yard, we've got some flooding issues that I'll tell you about another time. But I'm looking at Mr. Thomas, the Georgia wide receiver, and he's suspended indefinitely. These are the type of, when you start talking about cruelty to children and 3 counts of family violence battery, I would imagine these are the type of charges that are taken very seriously by the courts.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why we have family violence centers and, places where children and mothers and fathers, for that matter, that are victims of family violence can go for relief. And I guess probably what's most disturbing, and it appears, why Georgia has been forced to take such affirmative action relative to this gentleman, is the fact that it's not his first bite out of the apple. So I was looking a little bit online when I first saw it come up. And he appears to have had effectively a judicial diversion program a year or so ago. I'm sort of glancing over here at my other screen where it reports that, he was charged with false imprisonment and a misdemeanor count of family violence battery. And of course, when we talk about battery is the actual physical striking. So, when you have that type situation and then you have a set of circumstances in which you have these multiple counts of, cruelty to children, I mean, it's just one of those things nobody can kind of look askance at. I mean, you've got to kind of take that one head on. It's some dangerous stuff.
T. Scott Jones, yeah, I wanted looking at that and his past behavior. How we know what we can talk about what Georgia should do because this. You're right, it's the second bite at the apple. As far as the courts go, does it matter whether or not charges like that were dropped or he pled out for misdemeanors or things like that, or will a judge look at that and maybe be a little less lenient because it's like, you've had this happen to you before and you haven't really shown any remorse or willingness to get better over it? How much can that be used against them?
From a judicial standpoint and a prosecutorial standpoint, having, defended literally thousands of folks, when you sort of have that one bite out of the apple, we're all human, we all make mistakes, but when you've had that one bite out of the apple and then you go back for seconds, I mean, judges don't like it, prosecutors don't like it, and it's much more difficult. The explanation or the excuse that you have, it begins to fall on deaf ears. And albeit you can be the greatest football hero in the world, but if you can't keep your personal life in check and in order, then you're never going to hear the cheers again. I mean, that's reality. And I mean, it is a harsh set of circumstances. I mean, he certainly enjoys the privilege, and just like we all do, of being innocent until proven guilty, but it does not look good from that situation that he's facing.
Judges go back and forth to the courtroom just like anybody else. They hear about what's going on in pop culture, and obviously Georgia football is big pop culture there in Athens. I'm curious, the judges have to hear that they've had these traffic issues. The judges, though, however, could be Georgia fans. What is more likely in a southern city, that you get preferential treatment for an athlete, or in this particular case, you get hey, we're going to come down on you because you got a lot going for you type of judge? Or is it just random?
I think it's sort of random, but I think it's a balancing act. I mean, when you come in there the first time, I think you get the benefit of the doubt. Obviously we want to see you on Saturday. We want to see you, take care of business for the mighty Bulldogs. But that being said, at some point in time, you just can't accept this type of behavior. And not that it's ever been acceptable. The reality of it is in today's climate, I mean, it's a non-starter. I mean, it is just absolutely a death knell. And so judges, albeit they may have some sort of an affinity for a university and a program and their athletes, they're elected by the population. And the population's just not going to tolerate this. When you talk about, cruelty to children, you talk about false imprisonment, you talk about things of that nature, those are just non-starters. I mean, we're all taught the basic principles of keep our hands to ourselves, behave ourselves from just a young age on. And, if you can't manifest those principles in your everyday life, then bad things are going to happen. And in this situation, I think you're going to have, when you have that scrutiny focused on a judge relative to it, and you're going to have victims groups and advocates that are there, they're going to be looking at it. And sometimes when that light is shined brightest on a judge, then the judge is going to basically do absolutely perfect dead letter what the law requires him to do. So sometimes in a circumstance like this, Rara is not going to get that preferential treatment. He's probably going to get treated a little bit harsher than basically anyone else because of the nature of it. I think, we look at this as far as, holding folks that are athletes to a higher standard. I think, it's not even a higher standard. It's just the same standards that you, me, or Caleb, we all would be held to with regards to our conduct, both with those that we love or that we interact with. So I'd be interested to see how this plays out.
Yeah, on a national scale, T. Scott Jones, what kind of makes me think, because you talked about the second bite of the apple, we're a lot, as a society, just less lenient. It falls on deaf ears, your excuses at that point, the second bite of the apple. The first thing that came to my mind was the sentencing OJ got for stealing his own stuff, which seemed harsh to a lot of people, but many of us were like, yeah, but you got off for double murder, so why were you stupid enough to go commit another crime when you got the luckiest draw in the world?
You dodged a major bullet. You ought to be not only living at the foot of the cross, you ought to have both arms around it at all times. And, it looks like sort of a pattern of conduct, and I guess, we've all heard this about our beloved university, the University of Tennessee, God's university, as I refer to it. We hear this going on down at Georgia. It just posits that question. Kirby got a lack of institutional control. Those are the harsh words nobody wants to hear, but you either get your athletes in line or, bad things are going to happen. And is this indicative of a larger problem? Because they talked about all these speeding tickets and other things. Just because you're an athlete does not excuse you from meeting the regular standards of conduct.
Great stuff. T. Scott Jones, we appreciate it. banksandjones.com. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Yeah, I will tell you, Caleb, the more I hear about that OJ guy, the more I just don't like him.
I'm sorry. That was always the thing.
He's just not a likable fella.
I remember people trying to say that sentence was only so harsh because of the 94 case. I'm like, yeah, well, that's his fault. Why would you?
Yeah, well, it had all kinds of correlations between the birthdays of the victims. It was overtly, I don't know if you know that, the judge, the days were their ages and that sort of thing. Did you know all that?
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, so every number she gives out where she hammers him, it's not just a random number. It actually means something, which that is totally taking your power outside of what it's supposed to be. But it's
if you have if you're within the legal realms to do it,
it's OJ, and I'm completely okay with that.
Yeah. It's so looking at it when you were at Tennessee, you obviously, we talk about the arrest reform and things like that. Was there ever a serious one that you covered where it was you had to question, I don't think this guy should stay on the team, because you thought that this guy should maybe, you watched him and you were like, he's going to be in handcuffs in a year or so?
Yes, there were a few, but there are also a few that I thought that they ended up being stand-up citizens. I can remember one young man coming from Compton, and Philip Fulmer said that, hey, I had to get him off the streets at Compton, so he got him on campus early before he was supposed to enroll. But that guy ended up being a stand-up guy and a very good football player for Tennessee. Not incredible, but very good. And Philip Fulmer was right, so he helped somebody. So the notion that it's always just about him and getting better and get the football team better is a little too simplistic. There are times when, had that guy stayed at Compton for a couple more weeks, maybe he would have gotten in trouble and never got to UT and never played for a few years in the NFL.
Well, that's the Saban argument that we've all heard him say. What was it? He did that rant, and it was a great rant when, the tough disciplines of college football fans are like, kick him off the team. He committed. He broke a team rule. Kick him off. It seems like, where do you want the kid to be? Like, what do you want as a society? Do you want him just, okay, now you want to throw away his future? What, do you just want him in the street, like having to figure out a way to commit a crime? Or do you want him graduating, maybe bettering himself and becoming a contributing member of society?
That, and what would bother you more? See, I'm fine with going back to the Steve Spurrier. His rules were really simple. If you hit a woman, you weren't on the team, right?
Right.
And he said that publicly. That's a fact. And the other rule he had is that he would suspend people for meaningless games early in the season. He wasn't worried about fining them because fines weren't a thing back then, and NIL wasn't a thing. But for minor issues, I'm okay with suspending somebody for a meaningless game. You still want to go out there and play well. And with Tennessee's offense, are you telling me a receiver wouldn't just absolutely hate sitting out a game? If one of the starting receivers did something wrong and they had to sit out a game, that would be awful. You want to go out there and star. That's what you do all the work for.
Well, yeah. And it's also, for most people, not everybody, but for most people, even if they have discipline issues, it's embarrassing to be suspended, isn't it? Even if it's a meaningless game, it's embarrassing to say you were suspended for a game.
Well, I would hope so.
Yeah. And you're right. Spurrier he admitted, though, he said, I got kind of lucky because I set that ground rule in Florida, and the first person I did that I dismissed from the team wasn't an important player. So he did acknowledge that.